Hello everyone! So, who is ready to save the galaxy? Except for Loki. Let's do this really quick review and I hope I make it concise. This is second to the last week and next week I'll be posting only one lesson. Grades are due this week, so I need you to turn in your assignments. Okay, start from the last week, which is this week, week 10. Turn those and work your way backwards. Week 9, week 8, week 7, week 6. Most likely, I will end up using the most recent assignments to put grades in. So make sure that you put in those. If you do not turn in your assignments, I'll have no choice but to put in a 0. So, let's talk a little bit about what we have covered so far during these 10 weeks. First, we talked about Bach. And Bach is a Baroque composer. Baroque is an era. It comes before the Classical and after the Renaissance. Baroque is a pretty large chunk of time. It's 150 years. And the end of the Baroque era is considered the death of Johann Sebastian Bach. So he lives at the last part of the Baroque. He is a German composer, okay? So he was born in Germany and he stayed in Germany the whole time. His sons became famous composers, at least 4 of them. Carl Philipp Emanuel became more famous than him, and Johann Christian was the teacher of Mozart for a brief time. Bach was a virtuoso organ player, and he composed many pieces. He composed for harpsichord, organ. He wrote things that were called toccatas, fugues, and he used imitation. That is when you play something and then another voice states it the same way in a different interval or a little bit later, etc. So, he also composed the Brandenburg Concerto. And he used the harpsichord basso continuo. I will remind you again when we talk about Purcell. So, basso continuo requires one bass instrument that is capable of sustaining sound, like a cello or a bassoon, and one instrument that is able to produce harmonies, like harpsichord, organ, or a lute. So, Bach also composed many cantatas. Those were for singers and an orchestra. And they had recitatives and arias. Arias are sung, people sing. Recitatives is like they are talking. And there is an accompaniment in the piano. Bach had 20 children. He married twice. And he suffered from blindness. So he lost his sight towards the end of his life. Handel was the other virtuoso organ player and harpsichord player. He was born in Germany, also Germany like Bach, okay? But he lived in Italy and spent a lot of his time in London. The Queen loved him. Later, when she died, the King loved him. He was the director of the Royal Academy of Music. He improvised on harpsichords. And he is famous for writing the water music. The water music, they loaded the musicians on boats and they played while they were floating down the river. Okay? And another important piece that he wrote was the Royal Fireworks Suite. So he got lots of wind instruments that were capable of playing outside and being heard. And there were lots of fireworks that were going on. The piece was a success, but the building that contained the fireworks burned down. He is most famous for his oratorios. Oratorios are like operas, but they have no costumes and no acting. So they have orchestra, choir, and singers, but everybody is in their formal wear. and they sing on stage, but they don't act and they don't have costumes. In opera, you have costumes and there is stage props and there is acting. Then we went and we talked about Purcell. And Purcell wrote lots of choral pieces. He was organ player and a harpsichord player. He was born in England. He's one of the most important English composers. So Bach and Handel, Germany. Purcell, England. Purcell wrote things that had a ground bass, which is not minced fish, but it's a bass line that repeats over and over, over and over, over and over, over and over. You get it? It repeats over and over. Bass line. And then the stuff above it changes, and that's how he creates a whole piece. Again, I'm reminding you about what basso continuo is. It is a low instrument capable of sustaining sound, long sound, that's cello or bassoon, an instrument that can make harmonies, harpsichord, organ, or a lute. Then we went and we talked about Vivaldi. And Vivaldi was very productive. He wrote 500 concertos. He was a priest and he was known as the red-haired priest. He also wrote operas. He is famous for writing the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons were based on sonnets, which is poetry, and they are supposed to invoke vision of the four seasons and things that are events that are happening, like pictures, like in your head of what is happening during spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Then we went and we talked about Tartini, who was a great violin player. And he wrote lots of sonatas, and he is famous for writing the Devil's Thrill Sonata. So he was in bed, and he dreamt that the devil came to his bed, and he played for him, and then he wrote it up. Cool kid. Now, Corelli lived before Bach and Handel. And so he is famous for writing his concerti grossi, concerto grosso. So there are important concertos and they established the style. Although he didn't invent the concerto grossi, he developed them. And Vivaldi was his successor. Okay, so we have Vivaldi, Tartini, and Corelli are Italian. Bach and Handel are German. Okay? Now, let's go back to focus on sound. Then we went and we talked about Haydn. Haydn is now in the classical period. He was born in Austria. So, we have Bach and Handel, born in Germany, Vivaldi, Tartini, and Corelli, Italian, and Haydn is Austrian. Austria is next to Germany. So he was a choir boy and he got kicked out of school because he cut off the hair of the boy that was in front of him. Also, his voice began to change, so they didn't have much use for him in the choir. So he had a huge sense of humor. He was sort of rich because he worked for princes. And Prince Esterhazy was his employer. He had famous pieces like the Surprise Symphony, in which he noticed that people tended to fall asleep. So he wrote a huge hit on the drums to wake people up when they least expected it. And he also wrote the Farewell Symphony because when Esterhazy went to his summer mansion, the musicians had to follow, but without their families. So they really wanted to cut the vacation short so they can go see their families. And so he wrote the symphony in which players were exiting the room one by one without, really telling the prince and offending him. So the prince finally got the message. Haydn is the father of the symphony, and he also popularized the string trio. Okay? So he visited London when he wrote the London symphonies, and he was the teacher of Beethoven. Okay? So Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach was a famous son of Bach, but he is not the one who taught Mozart. Johann Christian Bach is the one who taught Mozart. And Haydn taught Beethoven. Now let's go to Mozart. Mozart was a child prodigy. He started playing piano when he was 3, and he wrote pieces when he was 6. He was a child genius. Okay? He had a sister that also played piano, and his father used to take them for tours. He wrote many pieces and concertos. And now the harpsichord being substituted by the piano, he wrote lots of pieces for piano. He wrote concertos, he wrote symphonies, but he is most often remembered for his operas, such as The Magic Flute and Don Giovanni. Mozart had issues with his health. He had to borrow money from his friends, and he died at age 35. Now we get to Beethoven. Beethoven was born in Germany. Okay, Bach, Handel, Beethoven, they were born in Germany. Vivaldi, Tartini, Corelli, born in Italy. Haydn and Mozart, born in Austria. Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, 3 of them, despite where they were born, they worked in Vienna. They're called the Vienna Classic. 3 Viennese classic composers. Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Bach was born in Germany, stayed in Germany. Handel was born in Germany, lived in London. Okay? I hope you don't have any questions about that. Beethoven was the composer that suffered from deafness. He lost his hearing in his late 20s. He was a great improviser on the piano. He improvised a lot. His father was abusive, and he wanted him to be like Mozart. So he had him practice day and night. Beethoven met Mozart briefly, and Mozart said, watch out for him, he will be doing great things someday. But besides that, they didn't have too much encounter. Beethoven studied with Haydn. Okay, Mozart studied with Johann Christian Bach, the son of Johann Sebastian. By the 5th Symphony, Beethoven has lost his hearing. Some say that he cut off the feet of the piano and put it on the floor so he could play laying down and feeling the vibrations. His 9th Symphony is amazing because for the first time it includes singers and a choir. Okay, so he broke the tradition and he laid out the groundwork. He was 1 foot into the Romantic period. So sometimes we refer to Beethoven as a composer of the classical era, and sometimes we refer to Beethoven as a composer of the Romantic era. Okay, so Bach was blind and Beethoven was deaf. Okay, not that this is really important, but I just wanted you to make the distinction where everyone is born, what they suffered from, what they were famous for, etc. So this is pretty much your review in a nutshell. If you need anything, just go over the lessons again. And if you have a score that is below 70, I would recommend that you do the lesson again, and I'll take the higher score into the consideration. So it has been great to do this with you. Enjoy the rest of your week.